Now, if you haven't heard of me, I am the MetaEmpire and Marshall. I live in Osaka. There we go. ASMR, all of you. I've been living in Osaka for about 16 years now. My Japanese is very bad. But in that time, I have done a lot of stuff on the side. So I've just been doing the English teaching thing because my element of responsibility is as small as possible, with the hours as short as possible, and being comfortable as possible. And Osaka's been great for that. That said, I've always been a creator, and I've always been a learner of sorts. And learning 3D, game development, product development, writing dev docs is just my thing. So having an outlet that allows me to kind of do everything in one space that I can share with other people is really, really useful. If anything, if the algorithm taught me anything, it was just that one time there was a Mona competition thing. I was always going through, I'm going to be better, I'm going to finish my projects, I'm going to do all these things, but I'm too busy learning. So in this case, it's like, all right, I started getting to the point where I will focus on a finished project. And at that time, Mona came up and said, here's a competition, take your skills and do that. So thank you, Google, for the one algorithm unit that actually is quite good. But before that, who was I? So I studied graphic design many years ago. Then as soon as I got into the real world, I realized that I didn't like graphic design. So I moved on to web design and every other kind of digital thing that I could get my hands on. So I looked at web, multimedia, pre-visualization, toys, game design, and all sorts of things in Australia, which was great. But as a freelance designer, stability is less of a thing that you get to choose from. The game studio that I was working for, unfortunately, didn't get any funding, so I had to move on. And a friend basically said, hey, these guys in Japan will take anyone. Do you want to do that? I was like, sure. Moved to Osaka. So that's that story real quick. But in that time, I would consider myself an amateur creator. So the goal was learning 3D, animation, sculpting, modeling, like interactive experiences. The list was forever long. And it's one of those things where I will learn something about halfway through a project and it's like, well, I could do this better now. And start again and again and again. And when you do that for 16 years, you start getting a little bored with the end result of not that much. So, 1 year ago, they gave me this one algorithm thing, which was like, try that. And managed to win the SciFi section of the Mona Filecoin Bounty. This is a space that won. This is actually the first space that I ever made. I usually focused on character design and animation and stories, I guess you could say. But these guys were purely a space, and I was like, well, some of that information will carry over to spaces, and I managed to make this. So I could show that just quickly. So this is a space, and back then, 1 year ago, they were pretty determined to sort of say a 50 by 50 meter space. Turns out you don't have to do that. And this is one of the things that I brought to Mona, I think, is, okay, how can we push this medium to as far as possible? And what is not 50 by 50 meters, which turns out is an O'Neill cylinder. But the thing is, with any Web3 space, generally you have to optimize in a way to make it work in that environment. And we're looking at that a bit more in this in a second, I guess. But in this case, so you look at the distance, for example, and like those O'Neill signs are actually like warped to make it look like it's further through perspective and things like that. And in that process, I was helping as much as I could. You had a lot of builders going through the space and having a difficult time with Unity. So I was like, all right, well, I know this pretty well because I've been playing with it for so long. What can I help here? So in the Discord, I was like helping as many people as I could while I was making this, and then finding out, okay, how far can we push a simple Mona space? And this is not as simple as one would expect. But say, for example, we have like the Earth just orbiting around the space. We have the sun there. We have all sorts of elements of that experience. And now I want to get into this space, since now we put canvases in and things like that. We didn't have access to that 1 year ago. So there was a lot of, okay, how do I make this cool but future-proof? And also, so it was a very interesting journey in regards to what can I do with this space? And luckily I won. And then I asked the guys, hey, do you want to employ me? Because I can tell some things. And they go, sure. And the rest is history. Now I am the guy to try and help other people not fail as much. A lot of people have mentioned that so far, where it is a learning curve 100%, but if you've never done Unity, if you've never done Blender, if you've never done all of the applications, and there's a few you can use, like how do you teach these people to make a space that works? And with Web3, especially with Mona on a browser, there's a few limitations that you have to abide by, but not as many as, say, other situations. So the idea there is how far can you push a space in a limited amount. So let's go into a bit of that for a bit. So I'm the builder support guy. I'm in the Discord all the time saying this is how you should do that. You can't do it that way. So you either love me or hate me for the information I will tell you, but all of the no's don't do this. And there's a few of them, because in a Mona space you have to work with the graphics card, RAM, how good is the computer, how are you using that space, and all those sorts of things. One thing I've picked up in the last year, though, is that helping people achieve their vision is quite difficult when the starting point of that vision is everywhere. So the interesting thing with the Metaverse is that instead of just game design, where you'll just say, I learned game design and I can do these sort of things, there's a lot of people coming into the space from not game design. The problem with that is game design allows you to create the better spaces. So being able to merge those two spaces in one to allow people to build whatever they want is a process. I'll say that much. So on that, we have people coming in from architecture, music, communication, science, social, theatre, information therapy, services, art, education, industrial design, products, marketing, entertainment, medicine, and many more. There are lots and lots of spaces that could utilize Web3, metaverses, all these sort of things. But if you'll note, there is no game design in that category. So all of these people need to learn how to do some element of game design in order to make a Mona space run smoothly. You can definitely grab one of the big high polygon spaces, put it in Unity, and that'll look amazing, but it will also run at 2 frames a second, which is not exactly the experience you want. So getting people to that level of creating that vision and making it work. Now, where that works is a big part of it. So you could do Web3, browsers, all those sorts of things. We've got VR, AR, MR, XR, all of the Rs. I'm sure there'll be more soon. And each device you use will define how you create the space. So, for example, a standalone VR like the Quest 2 is a very limited device. It's basically a phone. The catch with VR, you need to run at basically 90 frames a second, so your user doesn't throw up or feel sick. And that's not the best experience for anyone. So basically being able to design your space to work on the platform you want is very important. So talking about game development, which is what I've done in my off time just because I enjoy doing it, that's a very important thing. So creating digital experiences for entertainment purposes. We all know Fortnite. We all know Cyberpunk 2077. There's a lot of things there. But what we're looking at nowadays is an experience development. So we're looking at creating digital and physical experiences for all of the purposes. So if you have someone in therapy, there has been results that if you're trying to help someone through that in VR, they are more open because there's less judgment from the avatar sitting across from you. So architecture, you could just send a link in Mona and you don't have to download anything, you don't have to do it. It's just 100% a thing that you can do very easily, which is great. But you do have to go through the process of doing it. So the first thing you need to do is figure out where do you want this to happen. Now a desktop, like this, or a computer is much higher device. So you can do kind of whatever you want. especially in Unreal 5, which does some amazing stuff. Unity's getting there as well. You can kind of do whatever you want, which is great, but you have to download a client. You have to do all of these sort of steps in regards to get it to everyone. Not everyone has a good computer. Not everyone has all these devices, so that is the limitation of that. It's great, but also not. Then you go desktop VR, higher level, standalone VR, mobile, and of course other things. If you ever wanted to make a phone on your iWatch, for example, if you're that way inclined, you could. It'd be fun. The next thing, though, is your platform. So on each of those devices, we have different approaches to make it. So we have the application or the client. You can download the app. It takes a long time. Like some games are like 25 gig, 30 gig now, and that's not very accessible by anyone. We have pixel streaming or the cloud, but you have the problem where there's a little bit of lag between what you do and the result. So it can look better, but it has that a problem with that sort of thing. And then there's browser experience with WebGL, WebGBU, and this is a whole growing industry that allows people to create whatever they want. Mona is the browser at this point. We will be adding more experiences in the future, but by making the browser, there's many different metaverses that are opening up that allow you to create these experiences that I can just send you a link and it will open and work, which is cool. The problem with that is the device you choose is the polygon count, the material count, the lighting, all of these things play a big part in how well that experience runs. And if it runs badly, someone will log in and then they will log out. And you don't want to do that. So basically, you need to design your space to that. Now, if you look at the left, your left, that is a very high polygon asset, for example. That would work on a desktop in some of the latest game engines. But we can't do that. Decentraland, that's on the right. There's limitations because they're trying to build for everything. Mona, on the other hand, tries a different approach where you can design what you want as long as you can make it run. So if you are only going to be on a desktop browser, you can go on the second one, which is pretty good, on a hero asset or things like that. However, if you're doing a vase at the back of a room that is approximately 2 kilometers that way, you could use the far one on the right. So choosing how you create your asset will depend on where it's going to be. And that's a very important thing. We have lots of people who haven't come from a game design background that all of their assets will be the one on the far left, which of course doesn't run very well at all. So it's like, why isn't this working at 2 frames a second? Because that. My goal is to basically teach people how to get from that to any of the other ones to allow their space to run really well. So, we basically did this so I can zip through this really quick. If you're going high-end, you can have high poly count, more materials, large textures, large file size. You need a more powerful computer. So if you have $2,000, great. If you don't, not so great. So therefore, not as accessible. On the low end, you'll have limited poly count, limited materials, limited textures, limited file size, but it'll work on any device, which is great, but that experience will be limited in some way. What I loved about Mona was the fact that you could design your experience as you see fit depending on where you want to go at. So a lot of those limitations are not removed, but open to interpretation, which is a lot of fun. One of the things that really blew my mind with Mona the first time was like going into Unity, pressing a button, dragging it onto the browser, and working. And then I just like send that to a friend, and off you go. So that was really, really cool. And it's like I was hooked as soon as I did that. And then it's like, okay, how can we explore this space as much as we want to? And that's what the last year has been. So as much as I'm helping other people, I have 20 million other projects where it's just like, okay, what else can we do? And one of the fun things with all of this, and this applies with language, any skill that you get, once you know the rules, it's really fun breaking them. And that's one of the things that I've been doing over the last year is, okay, we have this new feature, how can I break it? We have this new feature, how can I push that to some stupid degree? And some of these experiences were like elevators where you fly around when we had collisions on a space. I made a Dance Dance Revolution arcade machine. The experience wasn't great, I will say, but it worked. So that was 100% a thing. And to me, just being able to have that experience of, I did that, and then never playing it again because the experience isn't very good for third-person experiences. With Reactor, you can use, it's a limited control of interaction purely because we don't want open scripting in a browser. Very security risk situation. So we had to come up with a way to, how do we create interaction with animation, for example. So Reactor is like, okay, we have this tool, let's see what we can do with that. So I did a multi-key pickup, which opened a door. So you have whole gamified situations, which I think is where a lot of metaverse spaces will be fun. And that's kind of one of the big things, is if you're going for a large audience, fun, interesting, interactive, animation-based experiences are the best way to go. I did a player counter. We didn't think we could do it. It did work, so that was great. I made a jumping castle, which was a lot of fun. Using all of these new features together to create one experience that allowed, like, basically the feeling of a jumping castle, which is weird in third person on a browser. And of course, Fall Guys, if you know that game, is basically a very popular interactive experience where competition is everything. I was like, okay, what can we do with that? So resetting a space, and all of these other elements of making it very gamified with a limited tutorials or a limited base of information was a lot of fun. And the problem solving to me is part of the fun rather than part of the problem. So you have a lot of these builders talking about failing, and that's part of the process, and it is. And exploring and building is a really important part of pretty much any skill. But I find that game development or experience development, the breaking is actually half the fun, and you get the whole happy little accidents thing on a regular basis. So a lot of the things that I've created, well, that's cool, I didn't plan it, but let's run with it, and I would change the whole space experience because of that mistake. So being able to game dev in different perspectives, once again, the architecture, the therapy, the music, all of these sort of things, allows you different insight into creating experiences online and what is important to you. And I think that's one of the big pluses for the whole experience. And yeah, I'm the guy to help with that. You've probably seen, if you've looked into Mona, or you will hear my voice, because most of the tutorials, the docs, all of that were created by me. We have a bigger team now for that, so we can help with that a lot. Thank you. And that's been a journey as well. So being able to get people across that line, like in Discord, coming as like, how do I do this thing that I know nothing about? It's like, well, do this, check this doc, watch this workshop. It's like, cool, thanks. And that is a great feeling for me, whereas like education is kind of the be-all, ever-all. And unfortunately, because of that, I've not focused on the spaces that I want to do. I want to break more things. There are so many things I want to break, but to me, being able to allow builders to create their vision wherever they come from is basically the goal. So that's me, and that's where I've come over the last year. It has definitely been a different year from all of the ones before it, and it's been great. The community, the people I meet, these events are fantastic. And I just want to thank all of you, actually, for coming to these events and creating these amazing experiences in real life, and then hopefully maybe taking these into Mona and seeing what happens when we break stuff. So that's about it. Have a great day and happy building.